The Grand Hall of the Oxford Union had never witnessed such tension. It was a crisp October evening in 2024, and the institution's famous debating chamber was packed beyond capacity. Students, journalists, and political observers had gathered for what was billed as Brexit Revisited, a conversation with Theresa May. The former Prime Minister sat poised in her navy suit, the same composed expression that had carried her through 3 years of the most turbulent period in modern British politics. Across from her sat journalist Emily Thornhill from The Guardian, known for her relentless questioning style. "Mrs. May," Emily began, her voice cutting through the hushed audience, "it's been 5 years since you left Number 10. Many still blame you for the chaos of Brexit. How do you defend your legacy?" Theresa smiled tightly, the smile that had become her trademark during countless press conferences. "I did what I believed was right for Britain. I negotiated in good faith. I fought for a deal that would protect our economy whilst respecting the referendum result. But the country was paralysed," Emily pressed. 3 failed votes in Parliament, your own party in rebellion, the nation divided. Was it really handled well? "Every decision I made," Theresa's voice remained steady, "was based on the best advice from civil servants, legal experts, and economic analysts. I worked tirelessly to deliver Brexit in a way that would cause the least damage to our country." It was then that a figure in the back row stood up, tall, distinguished, wearing a grey suit that marked him as someone important. The security personnel moved towards him, but he raised his hand calmly. "Mrs. May," his voice carried authority, "I'm afraid that's not entirely accurate." The room fell silent. Theresa squinted towards the back. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "My name is Jonathan Pearce. I was the Deputy Cabinet Secretary during your premiership. I was in the room for every crucial Brexit decision you made." Theresa's composure flickered for just a moment. "Mr. Pearce, if you have something to say, this hardly seems the appropriate—" "On the contrary," Jonathan walked down the central aisle, every eye following him. "This is exactly the appropriate venue. Because the British people deserve to know the truth about what really happened during those Brexit negotiations." He reached the front and turned to address both Theresa and the audience. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a small folder. "Mrs. May has spent 5 years claiming she negotiated in good faith, that she followed expert advice, that she put Britain first." He paused dramatically. "I have documents here that prove otherwise." Theresa's hands gripped the armrests of her chair. "Mr. Pearce, I don't know what you think you have, but—" "These are Cabinet Office minutes from March 2018, Jonathan interrupted, opening the folder. "The meeting where we discussed the Irish backstop arrangement. Do you remember what you were told, Mrs. May?" "I remember every meeting," she replied coldly. "Then you'll remember that 3 separate legal advisers told you the backstop was legally problematic, that it could trap Britain in a permanent customs union with no unilateral exit mechanism." The audience leaned forward collectively. This was explosive. "The legal position was complex," Theresa said carefully. "It wasn't complex at all," Jonathan's voice grew sharper. "Sir James Holroyd, the government's chief legal adviser, told you explicitly, 'Prime Minister, this agreement gives the EU permanent leverage over British sovereignty. We strongly advise against accepting these terms.'" He held up a document towards the audience. Cameras flashed. "But you ignored that advice," Jonathan continued. "And do you know why? Because you had already promised the EU negotiators that you would accept the backstop. You'd given your word to Michel Barnier 3 weeks earlier in a private meeting in Brussels." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Theresa's face had gone pale. That's a distortion of—" "I was there, Mrs. May. I took the minutes myself." Jonathan pulled out another document. "Here are my notes from that Brussels meeting. You told Barnier, 'I'll deliver Parliament. Whatever it takes. I'll get this through.' You promised him the backstop before you'd even consulted your own cabinet." Emily Thornhill, sensing the magnitude of what was unfolding, jumped in. "Mr. Pearce, are you saying the Prime Minister committed Britain to terms before seeking proper legal or political approval?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." Theresa stood up abruptly. "This is highly irregular. These documents are confidential." "They were confidential," Jonathan said firmly. But when a Prime Minister misleads Parliament and the public about matters of national importance, civil servants have a duty to expose the truth. The room erupted in murmurs. Security personnel looked uncertain whether to intervene. "There's more," Jonathan said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Much more. The backstop wasn't the only thing Mrs. May mishandled." "In January 2019, Jonathan continued, his voice now commanding the entire room, "Mrs. May told Parliament that no deal is better than a bad deal. She repeated this phrase dozens of times, but what she never revealed was that she'd already made secret arrangements to prevent no deal from ever being an option." He pulled out a thicker document from his folder. "These are Treasury projections that were deliberately withheld from Parliament. They showed that while a no-deal Brexit would indeed cause economic disruption, it would also give Britain complete negotiating freedom. The EU feared no deal more than we did." "But you knew this, didn't you, Mrs. May?" Jonathan turned to face her directly. "You knew that if you genuinely prepared for no deal, the EU would have offered better terms. But you didn't want better terms. You wanted to stay as close to the EU as possible, regardless of what the referendum had actually asked for." Theresa's voice shook slightly. "I acted in Britain's economic interests." "You acted in your own political interests," Jonathan interrupted. "These documents show that you instructed the Treasury to exaggerate the risks of no deal by up to 40%. You wanted Parliament to be so terrified of no deal that they'd accept your flawed agreement." He held up another paper. "Here's an internal memo you sent to Philip Hammond in December 2018. Let me read it. Phil, we need the economic forecasts to show maximum damage from no deal. Parliament needs to understand there's no alternative to my deal." The Oxford Union had descended into chaos. Students were shouting questions, journalists were frantically typing, and Theresa May looked genuinely shaken for the first time. "You manipulated economic data," Jonathan said, his voice cutting through the noise, "to force through a deal that you'd already promised to EU leaders, regardless of whether it served British interests." Emily Thornhill's journalistic instincts were in overdrive. "Mr. Pearce, why are you revealing this now? Why not when it actually mattered?" Jonathan's expression became grave. "Because I tried. I raised concerns internally. I wrote memos. I even approached the cabinet secretary, but I was told to stay silent, that it was in the national interest. I was threatened with prosecution under the Official Secrets Act." He paused, letting that sink in. "But last month, I learned something that changed everything."